It was the mid-1970s, a time when California should have been basking in its sunny reputation, but instead it was gripped by fear. A predator lurked in the quiet suburban neighborhoods, and by the time I got involved, he had already become something of a ghost. At first, the crimes were sporadic, a string of home invasions and disturbing assaults. Then, as the years went by, bodies began to pile up. The first case landed on my desk on a chilly evening in Sacramento. It was a murder, brutal and terrifying, and it was only the beginning. The victims were a young couple, Brian Majore and his wife Katie, both gunned down while walking their dog. They were found in a nearby yard, shot to death in what appeared to be a botched robbery, but nothing was stolen. Their deaths were senseless, brutal, and too clean to be random. Something about it felt different, calculated. This killer didn't just want to rob, he wanted to terrorize. As I combed through the crime scene, I found nothing. No fingerprints, no witnesses. Just the eerie silence of a predator who knew how to cover his tracks. Over the next several months, the attacks escalated. Each time, I was left with the same sinking feeling. A shadow in the night. A phantom who could strike anywhere, anytime, leaving behind shattered lives and little to no evidence. Soon, we realized we weren't dealing with just a murderer. This man had a history, a pattern, a hunger for control. He didn't just kill, he stalked. He watched his victims for days, maybe weeks, before he made his move. He broke into homes, tied up families, committed the R word while their loved ones were forced to listen, and then he'd vanish into the night as if he'd never been there. We called him the East Area Grapist, but I knew he was something far more sinister. As I gathered more evidence, the trail only grew colder. The brutality was spreading, not just in Sacramento, but across the state. Stockton, Modesto, Contra Costa. It was clear now that we were chasing a serial killer, one that craved dominance over every aspect of his victims' lives before snuffing them out. By the time the 1980s rolled around, he had a new moniker, the original Night Stalker. But this case, this investigation, was unlike any other. The killer was smart, methodical, always one step ahead. He wore gloves, took meticulous care not to leave any trace of himself behind. We had no DNA, no viable leads, and the more we learned about him, the less sense it made. His attacks were so varied, his movements so erratic, that it felt like we were chasing the wind. I pored over every file, every autopsy report, trying to connect the dots. The first victim, Claude Snelling, shot dead while trying to protect his daughter from being kidnapped. The next, Keith Harrington and his wife, Patrice, bludgeoned to death in their home. Then there was Deborah Manning and Robert Offerman, found murdered in their bed, their hands bound, faces beaten beyond recognition. The killings were relentless, and they left a trail of devastation across California, but they all shared one common thread. The man behind them was invisible, and he reveled in it. Years passed. Leads dried up, and the case seemed destined to go cold. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this killer was still out there, watching, waiting for his moment to strike again. Every so often, another cold case would be linked to the same man, now dubbed the Golden State Killer, but we still had no name, no face to put to the terror. Then, in 2018, something extraordinary happened. We had new tools at our disposal, the kind that weren't available in the 70s and 80s. DNA technology had advanced, and we began using genetic genealogy to track him down. We pulled DNA from one of the old crime scenes. Finally, a match. But it wasn't just any match. It led us to a name that had never once come up during the investigation. Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer. He had lived right in the middle of it all, hiding in plain sight for decades. The day we finally arrested him, the quiet suburban house, the garden he meticulously tended, the man himself, old now, unassuming, no longer the fearsome predator I'd spent years hunting. He was a father, a grandfather, a neighbor. But beneath that calm exterior was the monster we'd been chasing all these years. As I watched him being taken away in cuffs, I couldn't help but feel a chill. D'Angelo had evaded justice for decades, and he had watched us scramble, chasing leads, pointing fingers in every direction but his. He had toyed with us, just as he had toyed with his victims. He had stalked, bound, committed the R word, and murdered, destroyed countless lives, and we had been none the wiser. But now we knew his name. Now we knew who had haunted California for so long. The victims, those whose names had once been forgotten, were finally remembered. 17 confirmed murders, more than 50 cases of SA, and an entire state gripped by fear for years. The Golden State Killer had been unmasked, but the scars he left behind would never fully heal. This case, this ghost of a man who stalked the night, became one of the darkest chapters in American history.